until we bring YouTube online, which is. So I can now open up a formal welcome and to say World Horse Welfare and the Donkey Sanctuary welcome you to this side event of the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, where we will explore the role of working animals in addressing climate change issues and also issues of public health and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I would sincerely like to thank the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Senegal to the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Organization for partnering with us on today's event. We have a number of esteemed guests with us here today, but before I introduce them, I just want to spend a moment to let you know how we're going to run today. The event is taking place on Zoom and is also being streamed on YouTube. We will mute everyone except the presenters, but we really want this to be an interactive event. So please ask questions through the Zoom function or through the comments section on YouTube, and we will pose as many of those in the discussion session after the presentations. We're also recording this event, so it will be available for playback on YouTube afterwards. So please do feel free to forward that to anyone you think might be interested. So to get us started, I just wanted to reiterate our thanks to the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Senegal to the UN for supporting today's event. Senegal is a country that knows the value of working equids to the livelihoods of people, and where World Horse Welfare has been working with the Ministry of Agriculture for over a decade and now also has a partnership with the FAO there. I am delighted to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Barrow, whose previous appointments have included being Ambassador for the Republic of Senegal to Guinea. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope now you can hear me clearly.
Loud and clear.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the floor. And I can say that Senegal is very happy to join this event and to partner with you as we did in the past, and also to value the work your organization is doing. So to complete your presentation, so I was an ambassador in Guinea, so I was there as a first consul, and here I am the DPR, so the Deputy Permanent Representative. And I think some of you already met the Permanent Representative, who has as a commitment. That's why he wasn't able to be here with you, and then he sent me to do so. So having said that, I can say that for sure, you requested me to focus on Senegal, on how in Senegal you are addressing climate change, public health crises, and how also working equids can contribute on mitigating climate change effects and spread of infectious disease. So first of all, I will recognize and value the important role of equids in promoting family farming and climate change by succinctly highlighting the impact of the contribution of equids, horse, donkeys, and mules in agriculture production in Senegal and against climate change of rural household. So Senegal remains very vulnerable on environmental shocks, and including repeating natural disasters, particularly flood and drought, that will increase maybe in magnitude and extend due to increased climate effects. So the economic contribution of the global, at the global level of equids and is not negligible. Excuse me. Indeed, there is 10% of the world population is, as you know, is living on below the poverty line and depends on the income generated by equids. The work of a healthy horse or donkey can feed a family of 6. In another measure, so equids play an invaluable role in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal, in that they enable communities to fight against poverty, SDG 1, access to household food, and and the supply of food products to market, SDG 2, the reduction of drudgery for women, SDG 5, water collection, watering of agriculture perimeters, and the transportation of water for people and animals to households, SDG 6. So in Senegal, a recent study commissioned by Brooke West Africa, I guess you know very well Brooke, in Senegal. So they eloquently shown is that the use of equids as a attraction force has a positive impact on increasing yields, and that their absence would lead to a decrease in production. As such, they are an unavoidable production factor to rural households that depends heavily on agricultural labor. However, it is not enough to take into account the role of equids in sectoral policies and strategies for the development of livestock and agriculture. Few resources are allocated to the department dedicated to equine development, unfortunately. About 1% of the ministry budgets, according to the same study. And most of the projects and programs revolve around improving meat and milk production and poultry farming. So, now let's talk about the context and importance of the problem of the groundnut basin level. That's a part of the central Senegal. In Senegal, there is an estimated 500,000 horses and about maybe 458,016 donkeys. These distributed mainly in the central and northern part of my country. The situation is reflected in the fact that almost all farmers in the groundnut basin use drought horses on their farms. Several factors explain this phenomenon. First of all, it is a very high concentration of the rural population, nearly 50% of the total population. And then the least urbanized regions are largely located in the agroecological zone on the groundnut basin. That means the region of Diourbel, Fatick, Kaffrine, and Kaolack. So 57% of Senegal arable land is mostly located in the same area where agriculture works is based on family labor and harnessed cultivation. Also, family farms are the only way to feed the farmer, and contribute to the food self-sufficiency of rural households. Equids are the first factor of production accessible to farmers, given the challenges posed by mechanization. Moreover, harnessed cultivation is rooted in their crops and daily practices. So the energy developed by drought animals for harnessed cultivation, various agricultural work such as ploughing, sowing, weeding, ridging, and for the transportation of goods, agriculture input, manure, fodder, crops, etc., favors the achievement of technical agriculture itineraries and constitutes a real progress in terms of productivity. This form of energy, when properly used, is more respectful of fragile environment than motorization would be. Alongside these factors, it appears that in semi-arid area, horses and donkeys and environment are adapted to their physiology due to the dry climate and the absence of trypanosomes. This is probably one of the main reasons for the lack of trypanosomiasis. So in short, it is safe to say that the well-being of rural communities is closely linked to the possession of a well-maintained equine animals, horse, or donkey, or mules, with good working conditions. So equine's welfare is therefore a factor that allows the farmer to boost his production and to ensure a good availability of cereals that can cover a good part of the household's consumption. So by finishing, I would also say that the permanent mission of Senegal is also sponsoring another event, maybe on Friday, the 10th, at 8 a.m., very early in the morning. So, yes, Eastern time in New York, with another organization like yours, Brook and OIE. So I hope all of you will be there. So thank you very much. I hope that you were able to get me with my very bad Senegalese accent, but I mean, I tried my best. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much. We heard you loud and clear, and it was extremely eloquent. Thank you so much. And you provided us with some amazing statistics there that really do show what the value of working animals are. And in the 21st century, in Senegal and in so many countries around the world, it's so important that the policies relating to their health and welfare really is relevant to climate, the health of people, the health of animals, and the health of the environment, which is very much around the One Health concept. So thank you so much. Plenty to think about there as we think forward to our discussion panel in a while, once we've heard from our other presenters. And I'm delighted to introduce our next presenter, Daniela Battaglia, who's Animal Production Officer as part of the Animal Production and Health Division of the Food and Agricultural Organization. Daniela is a great friend of the working equid community, and the ambassador mentioned the Brook, and along with SPANA, we collectively form the International Coalition for Working Equids, which I know Ian's going to be talking about later. But Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rolly. And I will start by really congratulate all the organizers that despite all this health emergency disruption remain very active work, and they keep on addressing working animals and working equids, which are so important for all of us. So before I start the presentation, I would like to have a few words of disclaimer. I'm not going to address particularly working equids and working animals in my presentation, but I would like to remind everybody and to invite everybody never to forget that when we talk about animals, being them farm animals or animals in general, when we talk about agriculture and food production, we should never forget how important the working animals and the working equids are really in guaranteeing a good food supply and good agricultural production, and as them being not only affected by any of the important issues, two of the ones I'm going to address now, but also very often part of the solution. So please never forget to put them up on the agenda, the political agenda, and to address them in any forum, any event we do that address food and agriculture production. So that said, let's start on animal health and climate change. We do, as FAO, we do recognize, please, the previous slide, please. Okay, we do recognize how climate change is important and how we cannot address our objective. We cannot decrease hunger, we cannot reduce poverty, we cannot improve rural livelihood without addressing the impact of climate change, without reducing that impact and all its negative effect on food and agriculture production. At the same time, we also realize that we'll never address adequately climate change without reducing the negative impact of agriculture and food production, and without guaranteeing and securing that agriculture and food production are sustainable and the respect, the use of natural resources. So unless agriculture and food production address climate change in all their activities, we are not going that far. In turn, we're not going to meet our objective. So next slide, please. We are aware, next slide. So we are aware, the previous one. Yeah, we are aware of a direct and indirect impact of climate change on animal health. I would say that the direct impact is all the drought and floods and the heat stress that will affect our animals. And again, when I say animals, I include also working equids and working animals. So, and will have a negative impact on their well-being. They will have a negative impact on their health, because they will make them more susceptible to catch diseases. So they will decrease their immune response. They will cause injuries, for instance, in the case of flood and so on, or in the case of fire, as we have seen so recently in many countries, Australia, California, just to name it too. So the direct impact is there, but there is also direct impact how climate change, and especially making many countries more humid, wetter, or hotter, will increase the diffusion, the presence of certain diseases, of certain pathogens or their hosts, certain parasites. And just to mention a few of them, I will mention blue tongue, Rift Valley fever, African horse sickness, for instance, West Nile fever, schistosomiasis. These are all diseases that we have seen widening in geographical presence because of changing climate. So these are all important changes that we have a direct impact on health and welfare of animals, and we have some more to address. Next slide, please. So the way we want to look at it is just taking care of adaptation. So normally animals as human beings can adapt to changes. It's very important, therefore, that when we look at animals, we choose those breeds, those animals that are more adapted to the local conditions, being them the weather condition, you know, animals which are more resistant to stress, for instance, but also the disease, which are more resilient or resistant to certain diseases, or also respond better to scarce feed resources, or feed resources which are not of good quality. So taking all these elements into account is very important. Next slide, please. But it's also very important how we mitigate and how we use our animals to mitigate the negative effect of climate change. So we know, for instance, that there are several scientific research that has proven that the animals which are healthier, which don't have particular stress, will produce less greenhouses, gases that have a greenhouse effect. So they have a very direct impact on decreasing the possibility of climate change. On the other hand, also animals which are healthier, which have a better welfare, will produce more, will produce in a more efficient way. There will be a lower mortality and a better production. This in turn will make that per kilos per weight of their own product, in the case of farm animals, the impact of the emission of greenhouse gases will be lower. So again, an indirect impact on climate change. So we know we have scientific information, we have technical information on all those fields. We have to use that information to make our agriculture, food production, and the use of our animals more respondent and being part of the solution to address climate change. Now I will move on, next slide please, to what FAO is calling for. So FAO is calling to strengthen and expand all the platform, the policy framework, the infrastructure that should be in place to address climate change, but also promote research and promote innovation technologies. I was just mentioning some of the research findings that can help us. Just to mention another one, there are many feed options that will make animals able to use feed of lower quality and at the same time producing lower gas emissions. So all this knowledge should be used to make animals and working animals also part of the solution. We should strengthen our national veterinary system, of course, to address better the health and welfare of the animals. And in all our activities, we should use a One Health approach. I will talk also a little bit more about that later. By One Health, we mean an approach that takes care of the health of the human beings, the plant, the animals, and also their environment. So it gives a solution that decrease that address in a more integrated manner the health of all these components. And we should, as a last word, we should build up and work on partnerships. I mean, this good event is one example. We have many others with World Welfare, with donkey sanctuaries, and we hope to continue with even more partners to work in that collaborative manner. Next slide, please. So now I will move a little bit more on COVID-19 because I was asked to cover both climate change and COVID-19 by the organizer. And just to give a couple of words on what is FAO role on COVID-19. We work, of course, with countries, with national governments, with competent authorities, but also with many partners and many stakeholders in the food and agriculture sector to understand what and try to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on food and agriculture. We all know by now that the impact could have a very severe economic repercussion that, of course, as usual, are going to be even more important for all those marginal people, small and medium holders, pastoral people, and so on, that are already in burdened by the weight of other problems. Those countries, low and medium income countries, that are already that have already to face so many other constraints. So we want to look at specifically those communities and those countries and try to mitigate the negative impact of the pandemic. We would like, therefore, to safeguard the food security and the livelihood of the most vulnerable, and also working at research level and with academia, which are one of our main partners, to understand the origin of the virus, the spread, the epidemiology, and trying possibly to enable countries to address it better, or possibly also using this lesson to prevent other possible emergencies. And while doing that, again, we would like to use a One Health approach. So looking not only at the health of human beings, but also animals, plants, and the environment in which they live. Next slide, please. So just to give a couple of examples, what we do on food, we try to work again with countries to mitigate the impact, make sure that food insecurity is not increased, especially in the vulnerable population, and giving tools, giving policy example. I would like to invite you to read the policy brief on livestock that FAO has produced, where we mention a whole variety of policy options that goes from the financial measures and financial facilities for the more vulnerable population, for the smallholders, to training, giving subsidies to those population, price control to reduce inflation, also cash transfer in certain cases, or providing grants, providing technical guidelines, really to enable those population to be protected by the negative effect of COVID-19. But also we look at animals, and we try to enable veterinary services, but also other stakeholders, to look at any unusual morbidity or mortality of animals that could be linked to COVID-19 or other similar pathogens, and make sure that all this information is gathered to give us enough tools to face any possible problem. Next slide, please. So again, as I was saying, ensuring One Health approach is very useful. We have been talking about that since a while, and we've also coupled with One Welfare more lately, just showing that not only the health, but also very much the welfare of the animals is important and should be linked with the welfare of human beings. And so we have to recognize the connection. And again, COVID-19 is a good example of a link between the animal world and the human world, and trying to address all those issues in an integrated, coordinated, holistic manner. Next slide, please. And I would like again to address, to inform you about this specific guidelines, which has been produced by FAO, addressing animals. And in the next slide please, I'm just giving example of what we are looking at and what is the impact of COVID-19. I cannot go in detail through this information because we don't have enough time, but I would like to invite you to go to that publication and having a look at that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. So I would like to conclude again by inviting all organizers of important events like the UN Food System Summit and others, always never to forget to address working equids and working animals when we talk about farm animals and livestock and food production. And I would like you to participate in an event that we are organizing most likely next year. It was planned to be in November of this year, but we don't know if it's going to be possible, where we are working together, we're joining forces with Wardor's welfare, donkey sanctuaries, and many other partners in addressing the welfare of animals in the context of the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you will be more informed about this event later. And with this one, I would like to thank you, everybody. Next slide, please. If you need more information, you can always reach me. And I would like to thank you for the attention, and that will be available in the question and answer section. Thank you again. Next slide. Thanks, everybody.
Daniela, thank you. And the Donkey Sanctuary will be very grateful that you have a donkey on your final slide. So thank you very much for that. But that was a fascinating insight, and looking at both climate change and the impact of COVID-19, and very much how One Health, but also One Welfare sits very much at the heart of that. And so very much a common theme. And I thought also the fact that you highlighted partnership as such an important element, because these are big issues that we're talking about, and to be able to get us to integrate working equids into that agricultural policy making is a real challenge which we need to take on together. So thank you for that, Daniela. And there are many things that I'm sure people will want to talk about during the question and answer session. So if I can just remind you to make use of the Zoom chat function or the Q&A function on Zoom, or if you're watching on YouTube, on the comment section, we'll pick those up and bring those across. So please do keep your questions coming. And so I'm delighted then to move on to our next presenter, who is Dr. Rebecca Doyle, who is Senior Lecturer at the Animal Welfare and Science Centre at the University of Melbourne. But Rebecca is also involved with the Animal Welfare Action Network as part of the global agenda for sustainable livestock. And that aims to demonstrate that improved animal care and welfare really does contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. So Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks, Rolly. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Great.
And my slides are sharing?
They are sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me speak today. Like Rolly just mentioned in the introduction, I'm talking on behalf of the University of Melbourne, but I'm also talking on behalf of ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute today. And I'm going to be sharing some of the work from ILRI as well as some of the work from the Donkey Sanctuary in my examples. And that's all a part of the work that we do together through the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. So to start with, these are the three overarching topics I was asked to describe today. And I'm going to be talking about them from the context of my expertise as an animal welfare scientist. Just to acknowledge at the start, I think it's so important that we have these forums. Daniela's captured it, Rolly's mentioned it as well, that livestock and working equids are cross-cutting contributors to the vast majority of the Sustainable Development Goals, if not all of them. So actually having these opportunities where we can describe the role that they play in the livelihoods of over 3 billion people in small-scale agriculture globally is really important, because if we're not describing how to look after our working animals and our livestock, then we really run the risk of not being able to achieve the SDGs. So to start with, if I'm thinking about the future challenges that working animals and livestock are going to be facing, we can actually, one effective way of trying to identify the existing challenges as well as future challenges is to use an animal welfare framework. So this example here on the left-hand side of the slide describes the 5 domains model for welfare assessment, where it covers nutrition, environment, physical health and behaviour, as well as the mental domain, to all together give us an overarching view of an animal's welfare. When we're looking at animals in a smallholder setting, it tends on average, or more often than not, to be nutrition and physical health challenges that they experience that welfare challenges that they experience. Conversely, in more commercialised agricultural settings, it tends to be environmental and behavioural challenges that animals experience. Regardless of this, using this approach means that we have a broader framework, an overarching framework of assessing animal welfare that captures all these different aspects together. And it can be really useful to identify existing issues and benchmark future issues. If we're looking at welfare challenges facing working animals going forwards, what we anticipate is that the current challenges they experience are going to just be further exacerbated by climate change. When we're looking towards the positive contributions that working animals can make towards climate change adaptation at a household level or more broadly, we can look towards the One Health framework that I think Daniela spoke to beautifully before, so I don't need to describe that. But there's also the sort of sister, or the synergy framework that Daniela mentioned as well, which is One Welfare. So One Welfare aims to try and highlight the interconnections between animal welfare, human wellbeing and the environment. And it works really nicely in conjunction with One Health because it helps to capture the other impacts that people experience from having livestock in their lives and the impacts on the environment as well, and working animals too. I'll just talk through one example of that from the work that the Donkey Sanctuary is doing. As an example, the Donkey Sanctuary has a project in Eritrea where they're working to improve water access in villages. As a way to assess the impact of this project, they've used a One Welfare approach where they're trying to evaluate the impact on people, animals, and the environment. Looking at it from the perspective of people, they can see that through having improved water access in a village level, they're reducing the workloads of women and children, and as well as increased water safety for the households. At an animal level, it's reducing the workloads of donkeys that would normally be fetching that water, and it's increasing water availability and access for both the livestock and the working animals in that environment. And from an environmental perspective, it's having benefits as well by reducing the need for firewood and associated emissions that would previously have been used to make that water more hygienic and available to drink or safe to drink. To move forwards to see what we can do to address the spread of infectious diseases, again, this is where we can see that usefulness of applying a One Welfare and a One Health approach. We know, and Danielle also described it before, that good welfare and good health go hand in hand, and they together contribute to a better disease resilience. So that's a really useful way that we can again apply these frameworks to look at disease spread going forwards. But if we're thinking about specific and tangible activities that we can do to help smallholders and their animals improve their welfare and their livelihoods, then we can look at the issues that are facing smallholders currently during COVID-19. So this is an example of some information of impacts of COVID-19 on smallholders collected by ILRI and IFPRI. We can see that smallholders are facing challenges around veterinary drug access. So the access is reducing and price is also increasing. Similarly, the livestock actors in these markets are often informal, and so it's not and so they're less likely to be recognised and supported by government schemes aimed at offsetting the impacts of COVID-19. And at a household level, we can see that really dramatically, the role of women's workloads has increased. And this is due to a whole variety of different care burdens or activities that need to occur in a household level. And all of this is kind of these negative impacts, an example of some of the negative impacts of COVID-19 on smallholders. But despite this, there's also examples of where low to middle income countries are actually faring better during COVID-19 and in the agricultural sector. And that's largely because they have a more flexible and dynamic agricultural system. So if we're thinking about how we can combine these concepts of animal welfare and these frameworks, as well as the lessons from COVID-19 into future actions, the first one is that we can help support smallholders to improve their farming systems currently, rather than create alternative systems. We know in the future that in response to climate change or what other kind of really volatile situations occur, we know that having a flexibility of income and a diversity of income can help in resilience and adaptation. So that's one of the real values of a smallholder system. So really fostering this is going to be important and helpful to people's livelihoods. Second to that, we actually need to understand, though, the current issues that that smallholders are experiencing at a community level, and specifically around resource access and animal care. While we're going to have individual or community level differences, we can also see, and again, Daniela spoke really beautifully to this, that universally, we need to make sure that our veterinary services are better equipped. We can think about the resource access and how smallholders or larger agricultural systems care for their animals, but that external service of veterinary supply is one of the major limiting factors. So making sure that we have better services for all the animals and the people that need it is important. And then finally, I just wanted to speak to the value of having a welfare-focused approach. So the One Welfare Framework, where we actually capture the tangible benefits of livestock to people and the environment, and that three-way interaction between those three entities. Using this approach when we're considering the impacts of our projects, regardless of the project scale, and whether it's private or public partnership, can be a really useful way to make sure that from a sustainability perspective, all the major parties are being included and considered. Okay, thank you very much.
Rebecca, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Again, so much sort of connectivity between what you were talking about and Daniela, and I love the idea of the adaptability of so many of these systems, and the action that really strung out for me was when you talk supporting smallholders to improve their systems rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think that there's plenty that we could consider around that. And it's lovely that you focus so much in on the One Welfare concept. And because I can see that Rebecca Garcia, who has done so much to drive that whole forward, is listening in. So it's great to see the focus on that, and quite right too. So lots to hold on to there. So Rebecca, thank you. Just to remind people, I'm sure you'll have questions for Rebecca. Please do use the Q&A function in Zoom or use the comment area in YouTube. Now, for our final presenter, I'm going to turn to Ian Causey, who is from the Donkey Sanctuary and is Director of Research Policy. And I've lost my place because I know there's something else, and there's and advocacy, policy, advocacy and campaigns at the Donkey Sanctuary. Previously at World Animal Protection, previously for that was a British politician. Now he's doing some serious work at the Donkey Sanctuary. So over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much indeed. We live in a world where every conversation starts with, "Can you hear me okay?" But Your Excellency, Rowley, and distinguished fellow panelists, it's a great honour to be able to speak with you today, and many thanks to all of you who are watching the stream of this side event. In these difficult days, as we battle the effects of the coronavirus, we all know that the challenges of climate change, the need for a successful delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the threats of future pandemics remain. And it will be the decisions and actions of humankind that will determine whether we create a safe and sustainable world for animals and humans alike, or face the consequences of our failure to do so. For those who don't know, the Donkey Sanctuary is the world's largest equine charity, and whilst we do have sanctuaries that care for thousands of donkeys and mules, we also work internationally to help to improve the health and welfare of donkeys and mules in the field, many of whom are the working animals that are key to the communities they are part of. In doing this work, we have many great partners, and we are delighted to be doing this side event with our friends at World Horse Welfare. Between us, we are two of the 4 organisations that make up the International Coalition for Working Equids, the others being Brook and Sparner. And it is the sum of our efforts that can help us reach as many working donkeys, horses and mules as we possibly can. Now, today I want to touch on 3 points and to leave you all with an opportunity to be involved. Firstly, the role of working animals in creating a sustainable world and helping to mitigate the effects of climate change. Secondly, acknowledging their role as part of resilience planning and recovery from climatic events. And thirdly, how we build a safe future by understanding the linkages between humans and animals and stopping those actions that make future pandemics more likely. If there is to be a successful endeavour to mitigate the effects of climate change, then that has to be by us living in a sustainable way. Everybody involved with this HLPF will know the SDGs and what they seek to achieve, but what is often less well known is the key role well cared for working animals can play in building climate change solutions by aiding sustainability. Where communities have access to well cared for working animals, this can strengthen livelihoods, help achieve productive, sustainable farming, provide transport and labour, access to markets, access to safe, sustainable water, and helps to empower women and get children into education. Now, there isn't time today, but actually there are few SDGs which cannot be linked in some ways to donkeys, horses and mules, especially in countries where they are part and parcel of local communities. So I very much agree with Rebecca's comment on working equids being a cross-cutting issue for the SDGs, though even I have to accept that SDG 14, life below water, is at least one that I can't so far find a donkey link. And it's not just the role that they play in sustainable living to mitigate climate change. It's the role they play when climate change leads to extreme events and communities are hit hard and more frequently by exceptional weather. Where communities lose their infrastructure and are isolated, it is often donkeys and mules that get essential aid and support to those in need. Floods in Pakistan in 2010 killed 1,600 people and left 2 million homeless. Millions of dollars were donated in aid, and in many locations, the terrible ground conditions meant it was donkeys that ensured the supplies reached those in desperate need. And once the crisis has passed, the speed of recovery is enhanced where the working animals have been protected and can play their role in getting life back to some kind of normality. But donkeys, horses and mules are not immune to climate change. Our own work just in the last year or so has included assisting donkeys after a drought in Antigua, floods in India and bushfires in Australia. They can help mitigate climate change. They can help when climatic events happen, and they deserve our support and protection when they are at risk. So the value of a working animal can be high in real terms, but do we always appreciate that? In the United Nations Environment Programme report last year, warning that a 6th mass species extinction is on the cards, donkeys were given a particular mention. Talking about donkeys being killed for leather, they concluded, the unsustainable extraction of a resource, whether it's donkeys, plants, trees or minerals, can have adverse effects on the environment and communities in distant lands. In the case of donkeys, a valuable mode of all-weather, carbon-neutral transport is removed from those most in need of transport in remote rural settings. I suppose in simple terms, donkeys are worth more when they are well cared for and working in the community they're based in, rather than being killed for their parts. We've seen so much in the media in the last few weeks about the biosecurity dangers of the wildlife trade and wet markets. And there is a growing voice for change, which is to be welcomed. But there is a real danger that this may focus on wildlife and not to consider the other potential causes of diseases that can be catastrophic for animals, and when zoonotic, can be bad news for humankind. For example, there is a donkey skin trade that kills up to 4.8 million donkeys a year, often in brutal, unhygienic settings, sometimes illegally. These skins are transported across the world with little sanitation. Given the focus on wildlife and other known risks, such as intensive farming and antimicrobial resistance, for example, it is perhaps not surprising that this trade is less well known, but it is ongoing, and not only deprives communities of the working donkeys they need, but also poses a biosecurity risk we should all be concerned about. So we need the support of you all to get this message heard and to ensure we don't miss the opportunity to make our world sustainable and safe for humans and animals alike. So how can you help? Well, we are launching a Working Animal Alliance to address climate change, health issues, and to achieve the SDGs. You're very welcome to sign up. This will be an informal group of stakeholders who we can keep informed of our work, and a forum where we can help each other. For example, we can assist with the wording for countries when they prepare their voluntary national reviews, VNRs, to show what can be done towards achieving the SDGs by improving the health and welfare of working animals. We can share the latest news and research around working animals and the lives they positively affect. We can discuss how to participate and influence not just the HLPF, but other key events discussing the road to a sustainable future. And we are aiming to produce a report on working animals to be considered as part of the midterm review of the SDGs in 2023. On this Zoom page, you will be able to see and download the concept note of the Alliance, the brochure on working animals and climate change, and our ideas on how member states can protect and enhance their working animals by including them in their VNRs. So please download and please let us know what you think and say how we can work together. There is only one planet. We have to change if we want future generations to be able to live sustainably on it. So let's start to recognize the planet is there for all the things that live on it and work together to build a safer and fairer world for animals and humans alike. Thank you for your interest in our work.
Ian, thank you very much. You covered a lot of ground there. I mean, around sustainability and around, obviously the sustainability from a climate change perspective, but also from a disease perspective, and how intensive methods. And you've raised specifically the donkey skin trade there and the threat that poses. So I think that's plenty again to consider in the discussion shortly. But before we go to the discussion, we've had 4 excellent presentations, so plenty of food for thought there. We're going to have 2 respondents just to kick us off on sort of reflecting on what we've heard. And so I'm first going to turn to Bonnie Viper, who's president and founder of Thinking Animals United. Bonnie.
There we go. Thank you, Rolly. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to join the bandwagon.
You're good to go.
Good to go. All right. I want to thank all of the speakers and Ian in particular for inviting us. But what wonderful speakers. I learned an incredible amount, and I've been rummaging around this space for quite a while. And I really picked up some very, very interesting facts and figures. Let me just start off by telling you a little bit about Thinking Animals United. We started off inviting scientists to share with the public what the latest research in animal cognition and behavior was. In other words, what do animals think? What do they feel? They have emotions like ours, really in an effort to get people, to entice people to become more involved in their humane treatment and conservation. We now produce the Rethinking Animal Summits, which looks at the human and environmental impact of our treatment of other species from an anthropomorphic point of view. We look at the consequences of our treatment of other species to human health, which is what we're looking at now, we're living through now, to global security, things like biosecurity, agro-terrorism, the effect of lawlessness and poaching on national governments and communities. We look at world financial systems, the impact of oil and gas subsidies, agricultural subsidies, fishing subsidies, and extractive metals on populations that could be helped if the billions that were spent on these industries that are destroying the planet and our lives were funneled into animal welfare and human welfare. We look at, and then we look at environmental sustainability and individual well-being, the fact that we have divorced ourselves from the natural world. In our mind, we embrace the intrinsic value of all animals, their individuality, and acknowledge the interdependence of humans, non-humans, human animals, and our common and shared environment. So in 2017, I helped found with David Kirschenbaum from Peace International the animal issues thematic cluster within the NGO major group, which is a part of a system that allows civic society to enter into discussions about the Sustainable Development Goals. And I did it because we believe that animals, people, and the natural world are absolutely inexorably connected, and that this has to be recognized globally and acted upon if we're going to save the planet. The animal issues thematic cluster was set up to ensure that the care, protection, and conservation of animals was included in the Sustainable Development Goals. So animals impact every single one of the SDGs. There isn't a single SDG that is not impacted by our relationship with other species and how we treat them. Ian, I just wanted to ask you quickly, one, are the 5 freedoms at all considered in thinking about the treatment and welfare of working equids? Are those still, or do they really impact farm animals in the global north more than are they applicable in the global south with working animals?
I think, Bonnie, in answer to that, what I can talk about is what some of the work we've been looking at. And I mean, the 5 freedoms are still a well-established and recognised part of animal welfare. Personally, and I think as a donkey sanctuary, we look beyond that. Rebecca touched on it with the 5 domain stuff in her talk. I think we see that as being a better way of measuring the lives that animals live. And for us, it's kind of like, so perhaps I should make it clear, you heard slightly the gospel according to Ian at the moment, just in case I get but for me, it's kind of the 5 freedoms are things that animals should avoid because it'd be bad for them if they didn't have freedoms. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But for me, it's about what are the lives that they could lead.
Right.
That's about the domains. That's looking at the overall negative and positive animal has. And I think trying to get animals to a life worth living and then onto a good life should be a better aim for animal welfare groups rather than straightforwardly the 5 freedoms.
Right, I understand. Just for everyone listening, the 5 freedoms state that animals should be free from hunger and thirst, from discomfort, from pain, injury, or disease. They should be allowed to express normal behavior and free from fear and distress. And yes, Rebecca's matrix works better, I think, than in terms of animal welfare. I also wanted to say that I think that there can be a case made for some other SDGs to consider in terms of working animals, and that would be 9.3, SDG 9 being related to industry, innovation, and infrastructure. In 9.3, it says that small-scale enterprises need to have access to financial services such as affordable credit and integration into the value chains and markets. And I think this is very relevant to smallholder farmers. I would add insurance schemes to that, which I think are incredibly important when there is a natural disaster and a smallholder loses their animals. I would say that in number 10, reduced inequalities, although it basically talks about inequalities between countries, that 10.4 addresses the need to adopt fiscal wage and societal protection policies and aggressively achieve greater equality, which you can't do, in my mind, without taking into account the role of working animals in the lives of so many world's poor. And then 16, which is you actually did address, Ian, without identifying it. The SDG 16 addresses peace, justice, and strong institutions. 16.4 talks about the return of stolen assets. And in light of the donkey trade now, where donkeys in Africa and in other countries are being stolen, working animals that are still working and helping rural families are being stolen.
Bonnie, sorry to butt in, that's a massively important issue. Could you just wrap up, because we've got so many questions stacking up. I just want to,
yes,
to bring in Aileen.
Well, so that leaves only SDG 17, which is affordable and clean energy, 15 and 14, which really relate to biodiversity. So in effect, we've made the case, I think, for animals impacting every single SDG. And without acknowledge of that, I'm not sure the SDGs can actually succeed.
Well, that's a very powerful place to end it. Thank you very much, Bonnie. That's great. And I just want to introduce our second responder, which is Dr. Aileen Pipers, who's Director and Consulting Veterinarian at Pets at Play Incorporated, and is also on the board of our World Horse Welfare partner in Cape Town, in Cape Town, South Africa, the Cart Horse Protection Association. Aileen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this, and to all the speakers for very excellent presentations. I echo Bonnie in saying, you know, that despite reading around this topic a lot in recent weeks, that this has been really interesting to hear the different perspectives. And I think there's just a couple of points that I wanted to touch on, which is specifically around the role of direction of funding towards both research and training, because I think often there at the working level on the ground, there are ideas that abound that don't necessarily have research to back them up. So there's anecdotal evidence without necessarily research to back them up, and how the various institutions like Donkey Sanctuary, World Horse Welfare, and even Rebecca, ILRI, how they would respond to trying to get resources into providing training. I think we've seen some of the questions coming up in the Q&A about the fact that working equids are not always addressed within curricula. And then also around research into things like what role do working equids play. And I mean, there was just a very interesting paper that came out of South Africa recently about the role of the working horses on the Cape Flats in Cape Town. And that was published the paper was published quite recently, the poster a couple of years ago, and looking at the socioeconomic impact. And now that we actually have a piece of research that shows how much of an impact these working horses have within a community, it allows government to then respond much more appropriately in terms of developing policy for dealing with working equids. So I just wanted to put that out there for the panelists to maybe just mention something along those lines.
Aileen, thank you. That's obviously that whole area of education so important, and I'm sure we will pick up on that. So thank you for that. So now we're dead on time. So we've got half an hour for questions, and thank you so much. They are piling in. Well, let's see how many we can get in half an hour. The first one I'd like to direct to the Senegalese ambassador. Ambassador Barrow, thank you so much. You gave an excellent presentation, and Senegal is obviously a leading country in acknowledging the contribution of working animals, and we've heard so much about that, their contribution to sustainable development goals and mitigating climate change. And you obviously work with a number of partners. What can other countries, do you feel, learn from Senegal's approach? And what more would Senegal like the United Nations to do?
So I think that's a very, that's a very relevant question, but I mean, it's also difficult to say which country are learning from Senegal. I mean, we don't have any figures on that. So what we know is we are in an area, so the Sahel-Saharan area, so we are sharing the same challenges with our neighborhood. So, and then I think the situation in Senegal is utterly the same in the countries, our neighboring countries, maybe Mauritania, Mali, or Burkina Faso, or Cabo Verde. I mean, we are still facing the same challenges. So, and we know and value the impact of the working animals in our economy. I mean, in a daily basis, because many families are depending directly or indirectly to the to equines, and to animals in general. I mean, to their daily survival, because people are there struggling for life. So now, when it comes to the United Nations, indeed, so we had, so I think, with Dr. Sanduri, like 2 or 3 years ago now, I mean, to see maybe how to better make the world know the impact of the working animals in achieving the SDGs. I think this is also a very relevant point. In such maybe there is a room for action, but now I know that I mean in the UN, all new questions, all new issues sometimes are rejected in the first time, but I count on people like you to do the broad approach to all partners, maybe to make them feel the importance of the work. And I think that is not really taken in charge in the agenda 2030, but I think people like you maybe can, I don't know what it should be, maybe this, I mean, there is something, I mean, take a decision or something like that to anybody of the UN, I mean, to show the impact of animals in general and equines, particularly on this Sahel-Saharan band, going from maybe Somalia, Ethiopia to Senegal in the west, and even in the southern part, if you take countries like Zimbabwe, like any other countries, so there are also many people depend on the working animals, and this impact, this impact needs to be shown to the entire world.
Thank you so much for that. That's great, Ambassador. I'd like to move on to ask Daniela a question. Brian Perry, who is very well known to us, has asked a question around, he's done a number of evaluations of FAO projects, and whilst recognising the FAO does include working equids as livestock, he's not aware of any projects in which the specific roles, performance and functionality of working equids in a smallholder agriculture system features. How can this be changed from within the FAO? Daniela, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you, Rolly, and thank you, Brian, actually, because that gives me the opportunity to give a little bit of insight. I think Brian is right, at least we don't have any ongoing project or in the recent project, but as Brian very well knows, and maybe not all the others, is that especially for projects, we have to respond to the request of our member countries. So if member countries, and especially if a group of countries within a region would ask us to organize together a project of that kind, we will be more than happy to address that, but we cannot take the initiative and proposing that kind of a project to a country. That said, I think an event like that, and all of you could be very functional in raising awareness and advocate for the welfare of working equids, and through your contact with the member countries, inviting them to present and to ask FAO to intervene in that particular project. I mean, every country has its own priorities, and it's very important that all of us, we work in raising the importance of working equids so they will fall within those priorities. We do work in awareness raising, as you know, and providing numbers and evidence and fact that would enable countries to understand the importance of working animals. But the final decision is on them. So very happy to respond to them, and very grateful if you would convince them in asking us those projects, because I think they will be very relevant, and we're ready to jump into the opportunity, but it has to come from member countries.
Daniela, thank you. There's been a lot of questions around veterinary education, and we talked about it. Daniela, you talked about it in your presentation, and a number of others did as well. So, Rebecca, I was just wondering, I'm not sure how well placed, because I know obviously Melbourne has an outstanding veterinary school, for example, but in many countries, working equids, I mean, equine medicine is fairly low priority, and working equids don't even feature. What can be done to help support the education of vets within universities? So there's a greater awareness around the challenges of working equids.
Thanks, Rolly. That's a great question. And I've been really interested to see how commonly it's been a theme coming up with the questions from the audience. I guess this is probably something that's maybe a bit better directed to the Donkey Sanctuary or World Horse Welfare, because I know that the International Coalition for Working Equids, all four of those groups do teach veterinary curricula in some countries where for working animals where it's not covered. So they're doing an amazing job to actually build capacity directly at universities. And I guess another thing at a global level is that we could look towards the OIE and their day one competencies or their veterinary competencies, and they have that listed there really clearly what they expect for people that go through a veterinary training program to have. And so by supporting groups at different universities and to help achieve that would be a really valuable way of improving capacity. And the OIE also has a few programs with twinning, where you would have a university like the University of Melbourne or another university with a very established veterinary curriculum, including animal welfare, to pair with a younger university in a different country that doesn't have the same kind of depth of curriculum to help boost that. So there's some of the activities that are happening. And then I guess like another really, from an animal welfare perspective, one thing that I would really love to see being focused on after veterinary training is the level of empathy and understanding that veterinarians have towards animal welfare. There's been a lot of research that's shown that over the course of someone's university degree studying veterinary science, as well as let alone their life in practice afterwards, that they have a reduction in empathy just from exposure. And so having, starting to think about that and the role that that plays in the service that that veterinarians can provide to animals is a really useful thing as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. That's and so in addition to veterinary education, there's been a lot of talk about schools education. And Ian, I'm not sure how much the Donkey Sanctuary are involved in primary and secondary school education in your programs, but what potential do you think that, and it's very much obviously picks up on what Aileen was talking about, you know, that education element and actually starting it at a school level?
Well, I mean, I think there's no argument that the sooner you can get messages across to people about respecting animals and knowing how to care for them, to look after them, and to have them as part of your community, is a good thing. I think the real issue is if you bring it into that very early age of education, how do you keep it going through that lifetime? In a previous role, I used to work at World Animal Protection, where we certainly did have this sort of primary school education. So we had two forms of education modules that we put out there. One was advanced concepts, which was very much for universities and veterinary training. But then there was also initial primary concepts, I think, of testing my memory now, what we called it, but that was aimed at school children. Interestingly enough, we ran it for quite a long time, which enabled us to do some research going back onto what effect it had actually had. And doing that against control groups of people who had not had that education. What we found is it was extremely effective at the time it was given, and it did have an effect that led on. But often by the time people reached adulthood, their attitude towards animals was not very much different to those that hadn't had animal welfare education as primary school children. So I think the challenge we thought then, and I think the challenge for all of us, I think we'd all like to do it, it's how it's not a straightforward here today, gone tomorrow thing. It's something you have to reinforce and keep it in people's minds, otherwise it can drift away. So yeah, I mean, I think all of us want to see more education to children and to get them involved, but we have to think about what makes a real difference through their lives, and therefore the animals they will engage with through their lives.
Thank you, Ian.
Riley, could I jump in here?
Absolutely.
So just to touch on that, because obviously as a veterinarian and having gone through veterinary training, oftentimes the topic of adding more to veterinary curricula comes up. And while I recognize, you know, that's important, I think we've spoken already about One Health and One Welfare. And I think that they're, especially bringing in SEG 17 about creating partnerships for the goals, needs to recognize that vets don't work in isolation. And I think that there needs to be a lot more emphasis on how veterinarians work together with, for example, sociologists or economists or legislators to bring about the sort of like welfare benefits that we want to see for working equids, but also recognition of the role that working equids play within a community, because it goes a little bit just beyond the health of the animal and really to the role that the animal has within that community. So a topic like anthrozoology is becoming more important these days. And so as much as I believe, you know, that vets do need to obviously be very much aware of the things that they need to know in order to support working equids. And I was a direct beneficiary of the Donkey Sanctuary's work in South Africa when I was a vet student. In fact, I got the book that they were handing out about trying to improve knowledge around donkeys. But I think there also needs to be a focus on broader, the broader veterinary services, and looking at the para-veterinary professionals, animal health technicians, especially who are working on the ground directly with people, and how to get that kind of knowledge in at that level as well, and not just at the level of the veterinarian.
Aileen, you exactly the point. I mean, you made a very eloquent point there about, you know, the wider piece of vets working with sociologists and economists and putting it in that context. But also there's been several questions here around actually that in many countries, it's the para-vets who are on the front line, not the vets. And therefore, and Daniela, from an FAO perspective, obviously supporting veterinary services is a really important pillar of what you do, and obviously what the OIE do as well. How much of that is focused around the vet, and how much is that focused around the para-vet, the animal health workers, and the other support paraprofessionals that go within supporting animal health?
Yeah, thanks, Rolly. Actually, already several years ago, we shifted. A while before, we traditionally worked with countries, as I was saying, with governments, with competent authorities, those being, for instance, the veterinary authorities in several countries. We shifted into having a much wider audience and working with a much larger group of people. So we work very much with all stakeholders. That said, we work at community level, therefore more and more with paravet or other people that have that kind of role. We work also a lot with private sector. We work with NGOs that are doing a lot of time that work where the competent authority, the institution, the governmental authority is not there. So we work in collaboration with them, and we've been working with the Brook, for instance, and with many of NGOs in several countries. And again, private sector is very important. We work with research and academia, so depending on the kind of activities. But just now that I have the word, I would like to stress, since I've seen many questions that are addressing FAO, like why don't you do this, why don't you do that? And we are very happy to accept those invitations. But we normally work on direction that are given by our member countries. So I would like to invite everybody in September, from 28th of September to the 2nd of October. We are going to have the COAG, the Committee on Agriculture, that is specific committees where member countries will indicate the work for the coming years to FAO. So it's very important for countries being there, for observers to be in there. This year, particularly livestock sector is going to be addressed. And as Brian Perry was saying, working animals for us would fall into farm animals, so it's in that category. It's very important to be there and advocate for working equids, for working animals. This year, for instance, the creation of a subcommittee on livestock subcommittee is going to be discussed. Again, it's very important that we have a house for the animal issues that can be taken into account more in depth and with a specific attention. So please be there and advocate for working equids in the best, to be addressed in the best possible way.
Dania, thank you. Picking up on another aspect of animal health, there's been a couple of questions around disease surveillance. And obviously in 2020, the world we find ourselves in, never has there been a bigger focus on disease surveillance in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. But so many countries have disease surveillance systems for equidae, but often ignore the working equids within that country and aren't touched upon. And maybe if I could come to the ambassador and also then maybe to Rebecca and any of the other presenters that want to talk. Ambassador, in Senegal, for example, how important is equine disease surveillance, and is this able to incorporate the million working horses and donkeys that you mentioned in your presentation?
Can you please repeat the question, because I had, I think, some connection issues. Yeah.
So the question is around, sorry, it's around equine disease surveillance and how that is so important for supporting healthcare, for equine healthcare in any country. But the point's been made that often working equids get missed by that, so those surveillance programs. How important is it in Senegal for equine disease surveillance programs to support all equidae in the country?
Yes, I think we are also experiencing this equine disease. So I think 2 or 3 years ago, I really don't remember, we faced a kind of epidemic in some regions of my country. So so far I think a total of 3,473 cases of equine flu was noted, with also like 1,782 donkeys, and as well as 1,691 horses. So what identified in many regions like fatigue, according to the regional livestock services. So yes, and this happens many times. Sometimes it's not very current, but sometimes you're facing facts like that, and the government is doing his best to address these challenges, because as I told earlier, I mean, livestock in general and equine are very critical for the survival. I'm always using survival because it's a matter of survival of the population, mainly in the rural area. So we are doing our best to face these challenges. I mean, and then as there is and that's not only a Senegalese, that's a cross-border challenge, because it happens sometimes in outside of Senegal, in some neighboring countries, to affect Senegalese animals. I think it is something that we need to take care of. It is a real challenge, very, very big challenge for our animals and for our economy indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca, from your perspective, from the university, what more can countries do to incorporate working equids within their equine disease surveillance systems?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know very much about the equine disease surveillance systems in Australia, let alone other countries to speak to. But I would say that, making sure that there's clear connections with the farmers or the people that own animals that are experiencing those issues can always be improved. I can see in Australia that can be improved. I can see in Pakistan where we work as well that can be improved, and I see that in other countries as well. So it's a worldwide problem. So if someone can come up with a great solution for it, that would be fantastic. I did notice one of the questions in the Q&A earlier was describing the use of technology and how receptive farmers are to that. And I think that farmers, in my experience, again, from Pakistan to Australia and in between, there's a real receptivity to technology. And I think that there's a big opportunity then to help to use this in our disease surveillance. And I know there's lots of groups that are doing that. I know ILRI does that, and government groups and things like that too. So I feel like once these platforms are underway, that will help all disease surveillance for all species, and it's needed everywhere as well.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. That technology, and what we've found the world over is that around disease surveillance, you can only have an effective equine disease surveillance if you have effective equine identification. And I think that's also where technology has so much of a role to play in the digitization of equine ID. So that's a really good point. Thanks, Rebecca. It's always the way you think, God, how are we going to fill the time? And the questions keep on coming. So thank you so much for them. A couple of sort of more controversial ones. And I'll ask this maybe to initially to Ian, but I'm sure others. Should countries invest in more mechanization to replace working animals? An interesting question relating to the obviously the climate change agenda that we've been talking about today. But Ian, what thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think the important thing is to not lose sight of the fact we're trying to build a sustainable planet. So it depends what you mean by mechanization. It depends what it is. And I think there has to be a degree of realism into this as well, is that in many countries where working animals are crucial to their communities and livelihoods, there's often not a huge infrastructure that supports mechanization in any way. So it's something that, of course, there can be opportunities where somebody showed me a video the other day of some seed spreader that somebody done on a small engine and said it would stop animals being overburdened out in the field. And you can understand where that comes from. But it has to contribute to us eventually living a sustainable lifestyle. And that's the challenge that we all face. And we also understand that some countries don't have huge means at this point in their development to invest in such things. So working animals, working equids in our line of work are going to be around for a long time yet. So we have to make sure that their health and welfare is the top priority. But of course, change does come and there will be some change. It just has to be the right change.
Thank you, Ian. And maybe I could just stick with you, and but if the other panelists have a comment, then please let me know. There's been another interesting question around the using donkeys for meat in terms of achieving food security and sustainable development goals, because you mentioned the donkey skin trade and what that has highlighted, the horrific practices that goes on in some abattoirs. And so as you try and sort of bear down on that illegal, unsustainable trade, that may have an impact actually on the food resource of donkeys. Where would you see the balance there, Ian?
Well, I mean, donkeys are farmed in various parts of the world, and they are used for meat and dairy in various parts of the world. Donkey farming isn't something that the Donkey Sanctuary promotes, but we accept it happens, and where it does, it's important that donkeys live the best possible life, and they have a life worth living. And I'm not sure that's the case in every circumstance at the moment. Interestingly enough, in the donkey skin trade, where a large number of donkeys have been killed, there hasn't. I mean, it's not only that the meat isn't used; there often isn't very much demand for it either. So, and that varies depending on which part of the world that you are in. But as far as donkeys being, I mean, my own general view, by the way, is that if an animal has been killed for part of it, then other bits can be utilised. They should be, because that animal's given its life for that. And I also think part of the question, I think I did see this online, was around end of life procedures as well. And there's definitely no argument in my mind that sadly some animals live lives that, to go back to the 5 domains, we always talk about having a life worth living, but actually some animals have a life that's not worth living. Yeah. And sometimes end of life done humanely and properly is the best thing for the animal's interest. But, I mean, I think donkey meat and donkey farming will continue. I don't see it as a big thing. I don't see a huge amount of demand. Where it happens, it's all about the quality of life of the animal.
Can I jump in, Rowley, with just a question for Ian, back to the technology issue and replacing donkeys with technology. Haven't there been studies shown that farms that use working equids are actually more sustainable, that the farming and the landscape is better managed with equids rather than machines? Have I seen studies, or have there been studies on that?
I think there is some stuff out there. I mean, the simple truth is there's not as much of it out there as we'd like, certainly not in the level of detail and the research we would need. One of the things we're going to do with the Donkey Sanctuary is through our global programs department, we've got a great new director of global programs who's just joined us, Kit Vaughan. And one of the things we want to do is to start to create some of these programs and projects in different parts of the world where working equids are crucial to those communities, and to start to develop programs that actually give us the data and give us the evidence to say that, so that when we talk to member states, national governments, the OIE, or whoever it is, we can actually say to these organizations, look, we've actually built really good programs in different climates in different parts of the world. This is what the data is pointing towards, and therefore these are the changes you should make. So it won't come quickly and instantly, these things never do, but it is an important piece of work, because I think for all of us who genuinely and passionately believe that well cared for working animals are not only living better lives, but are being more productive and doing more for their communities, I think we need to get the academic backup for that so we can make that case more strongly.
It's a really good point, Ian. Links with academia have also been asked about, and of course, it's not that simple, is it? Because in many places, actually, mechanisation is not an option, either due to the geography of countries, or in fact, we know with some countries where they have gone down a mechanisation route and they've come back because of the expense and the access to spare parts and fuel and the cost of that. So, as ever, it's a more sort of complex landscape. We are almost on time, and I haven't actually warned everyone of this, but and I really do mean 30 seconds and no more. But just, we've covered so much ground. I was wondering if I could just quickly go around the virtual room. I would start with Aileen, and just any sort of final thoughts, take-home messages.
I think, again, the emphasis on getting funding into research so that we have the data to back up the decisions that we're making. So, for instance, in South Africa, there was a thesis that came out last year that shows that a donkey's worth is more valuable within a community as a working animal, as opposed to a product turned into skin for the Chinese market. And if policymakers are going to be making decisions around these things, then they need the data to support those decisions. So somewhere within this, we need to be looking at funding the correct research to get the correct decisions made.
Brilliant. Bonnie?
For me, it's that people aren't aware of the plight of working animals, because in Europe and the United States, donkeys and horses are not used, except in Amish communities and niche markets like that. They're not used as much. We're mechanized. And it's incredibly important to get the word out about these animals and the need to care for them and protect them, and the need to increase their welfare. And also to develop programs to inform people that, donkeys are being skinned for the gelatin in their skin and hooves. And in China, it's being used as folk medicine to increase potency, to increase, for all kinds of folk medicine. And we need to make people aware of that so that some kind of campaign can be started.
So awareness. So investment in research, awareness. Rebecca, I'm sure that investment in research and the awareness will be reflect very well and mirror your thoughts too.
Yeah. Yes, Rolly, definitely. That's something that's really important. Obviously, I'm biased coming from academia and research. But I guess one thing when we are doing our research and wherever it is trying to encourage practice change, it's making sure that we're really engaging with the people that own the animals and are in the communities to understand their problems, work with them to come up with tangible solutions that are going to be sustainable, and listen to their empirical knowledge.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Ian, we've heard about the One Health concept, and the driving need to achieve the sustainable development goals. We really do need to recognise the One Health and One Welfare concepts, and that's an increasing focus for the work of the Donkey Sanctuary and the other NGOs, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And actually, what's heartening, because I think sometimes it always seems like it's a difficult road ahead, is that I think people are starting to see the logic of that, and you're starting to see some minds being moved. My last little plea for today, Rolly, is simply this, is that, one of the reasons we're establishing this Working Animals Alliance is so these conversations can continue throughout the year, and not just when we have a big event like this, great though this is. And so I would really, really encourage people to sign up to that, get involved, be part of the conversation, and let's effect change together.
Thank you very much. Partnership, SDG 17, so clear. And Ambassador, that's something that Senegal has very much been leading the way on, and recognising the work and the importance of working equids within Senegal.
Yes, indeed, Rolly, as you all say, and as I said previously, yes, that will be maybe my last word. Working equids is something very, very, very important to Senegal and to all our countries. So, as I said, many of us, including myself, we, my family, maybe we are depending on that. So somehow, I mean, being young, I told you maybe one time I have been maybe a horse driver or a donkey driver, because yes, where I was born in the northern Senegal, we used to use that to help us in transportation, in water supply, in many other things, even in construction. Yes, everything is, is horse or donkey related. So every single family has a horse or a donkey or both, or many of them. So I think it is a very important. And then what I can say is to encourage you to go further and in terms of protection of livestock and of working animals, indeed equids, and also to see how to better value this animal and in order to sustain the achievement of the SDGs, because without the impact of working animals in some areas, there will be no SDGs to achieve. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much. So many common themes have come through today. So I just wanted to say thank you to you all for joining us in our virtual meeting today. It's a great shame that we're not in New York, but hopefully next year. And I just wanted to say a special thank you to all of our presenters, the FAO, and of course the permanent mission of Senegal to the UN for supporting today's event. We've all learned so much, especially around the One Health concept and what this means in practice, where the health of people, animals, and the environment are all inextricably linked. And so all I can ask is you go back to your organizations, agencies, governments, and policymakers to raise awareness of these links and the role and the need to protect the welfare of working animals to help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, including those addressing climate change and human health. You can be part of that challenge. As Ian already said, please join the Working Animal Alliance. The details are there in the chat function, and download the brochure from the website and get involved, because this is very much a huge task. And we know that today's presentations are going to be recorded on YouTube. So please do take the time to go and have a look at those and share those with your friends and colleagues. Many thanks again for joining us today. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.